What is the most important thing we haven't talked about as it relates to the personas of those people that are probably listening right now and for the reasons why they might have clicked? That they're probably looking, again, we have the optimizers, we have those that have bad sleep habits, and then we have those that have real sleep disorders. What is the most important thing we haven't talked about that we should have talked about for them?
It may be the dystopian future.
Let's talk about the dystopian future.
What is a podcast if it does not contain, at least in this day and age, a dystopian future?
What is the dystopian future?
Probably the most spectacular discovery that has happened since you and I last spoke is the discovery of what we call the genetic short sleepers. These are individuals who, by way of a genetic mutation, can survive on as little as 6.25 hours of sleep, in other words, 6 hours and 15 minutes of sleep, and they show zero impairment in their brain or their body. They can do just fine on 6 hours of sleep.
I know where this is going.
And we have 4 genes that we've identified now. The first 2 genes, the first one identified was called the DEC2 gene, DEC2 gene. The second was called the ADRB1 gene, which I know it sounds like the next Radiohead album, but it's not the next Radiohead album. And these genes allow these individuals to get away with an amount of sleep that normally would cause predictive disease and sickness, just as we've spoken about. So at this point, probably some people listening are thinking, I think I'm one of those people. Just to put it in context, the probability that you will be struck by lightning in your lifetime is 0.0064. Highly unlikely. The chances of you having the ADRB1 gene is 0.004.
And the ADBR1 gene is the short sleeper gene?
Is one of the short sleeping genes. So in other words, you are statistically more likely to be struck by lightning in your lifetime than you are to have that short sleeping gene. So the probability is low. By the way, why is this the case? Why do they get away with this? And we've discovered now by using sort of genetic manipulations, we understand why. First thing is that they have a much stronger wake drive during the day. So you and I and all of the rest of our mere mortals will have these kind of like oscillations in our consciousness throughout the day where we'll have dips where we feel a bit sleepy and we're dragging and then we'll kind of they don't have that. They have, it's like a light switch, like a dimmer switch. You and I, we may sort of go up to like 80% brightness when we're awake. And then sometimes it will flicker and then we'll go down and we'll have pretty solid sleep. Maybe sort of, down to 20%, but the lights are not quite off, where sleep is good, but not amazing. These people have an all or nothing phenomenon. They are all 100% bright light throughout the day. And they can maintain 17, 18 hours of wakefulness, no problem. And then when they sleep hard. They have much more efficient sleep. Remember, we spoke about sleep efficiency, and I want it 85% or above. Almost all of their time at night is spent in solid, stable, sound sleep. And the depth of their sleep they have is greater. So they're awake more throughout the day. They build up a stronger wakefulness drive, which is called adenosine, which means that when they sleep harder throughout the night, which means that they can then be awake for more powerful stints during the day. Second, they don't suffer from jet lag.
What do you mean they don't suffer from jet lag?
Because of their strength of wakefulness drive, when they are circadian misaligned, it's as though they haven't traveled between time zones. They can just stay awake. They have a strong drive for wakefulness.
Who are these people?
They are these genetic short sleepers.
And do they pass these genes on to their children?
Yes, they do.
And so their children have the same?
They're heritable.
Can I have?
Well, firstly, let's take a step back before I get to the dystopian. This tells us something above and beyond biological fascination. It says there is a profound statement in evolution. Mother Nature has figured out a way genetically to zip file sleep.
Zip file?
You can compress 8 down into 6. On your computer how you can get a collection of files, you group them all together, and then you say compress these files. And you compress them and you zip them into a single file, and it's dense, it's packed, and it takes up less amount of volume.
Do they have the same life expectancy?
They seem to, from everything we can tell. So somewhere along the way, through genetics, evolution has figured out how to go from 8 and compress it down to 6. Where's the dystopia? Well, we've all heard of CRISPR, which is this genetic editing manipulation tool that a lab next door to mine at UC Berkeley discovered, Jennifer Doudna. She won a Nobel Prize for it. Is there some future, and I hope not, is there some future where we start to genetically engineer people from a need of 7 to 9 hours down to a need of 6? Imagine the reduction in healthcare burden cost, because right now, the burden of insufficient sleep is vast. Insufficient sleep will cost most nations about 2% of their GDP. Here in America, it's $411 billion of cost caused by insufficient sleep. In the United Kingdom, it's about $40 billion. In Japan, it's $50 billion. Solve the sleep loss epidemic, which I've been trying to do by saying, sleep enough, and you could, cause massive financial disruption in the good way. But here, if you start to genetically engineer people, could you reduce the burden that is caused by people currently who need 7 to 9 and take that burden away because they no longer need 7 to 9?
Why did you say I hope not?
Well, I hope not, because I think here's the following that happens. It's not that I'm against that idea. I would love for the burden of disease and sickness to be reduced and people not to suffer from that. And if I could find a way to do it genetically, I would. And you could think about people arguing, well, imagine the productivity benefits. I mean, huge upside of that. People are being more productive and they're probably spending more. So from a capitalistic society, it's the ad man's dream. Because when you're asleep, it's antithetical to a capitalistic society. Why? Because you're neither producing nor consuming. That's very cynical, and I don't buy into that, but nevertheless. So all of these things would be markedly better, would they not be, if we genetically engineered this way? Why do I fear it? I know for a fact that as soon as 6 becomes the new 8, everyone starts sleeping 4. And now I'm just back into the same battle again, because 6 is the minimum that you need. And they say, well, if that's the minimum, then I'll sleep 4. And when I find the next gene that allows you to get away with 4 hours of sleep, then they say, well, that's great. So then I can go down to 2. And it's a form of almost this sleep currency, inflation that I'm always fighting a battle. And at some point, I'll always be on the wrong side of that battle.
Crazy. These people with this gene can thrive on 4 to 6 hours sleep without any negative effects that most of us would experience.
Correct. It's
very jealous.
So, what is going on there? And what we're seeing is this incredible density of sleep and this epic drive for wakefulness. They are more efficient sleepers. They can get done what you and I take 8 hours to do. They can do it in 6.
And I guess, is there a way to easily test this? I guess go to a lab and get...
Yeah, so if you've ever done, I think, all of those genetic testing kits out there and a lot of them will allow you to download your raw data. All you need to do is download your raw data. And then there's a company, I think it's called Prometheus. Again, I have no affiliation with them. I don't know how valid they are. But then you upload your raw genetic data into their model, and then it will list and it will rip it apart. So normally those genetic services, they give you a nice PDF and it's kind of like maybe 15 pages of all of the main stuff. And this Prometheus is kind of like the old school kind of scientist nerdy. They will just give you this kind of raw, just kind of janky, 50-page report. The interface is terrible, but you can go in there and you can search to see, what form of the DEC2 gene do I have, or what form of the ADRB1 gene do I have? And it will tell you, are you a genetic short sleeper or are you not? And you can find out.
I've been thinking a lot lately about certain diet states as well and whether they have an impact on sleep. We're talking about circadian rhythms there. I was thinking about fasting a lot. And also, I think myself and Jack over there are in ketosis right now. I was
interesting.
Wondering when you think about brain performance and sleep and different sort of states, do you think much about fasting or about ketosis or?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag if you look at it. Certainly what you eat will change how you sleep. But perhaps more powerfully is how you sleep dramatically changes how you eat and how you dispose of those calories and what happens inside of your body when you are underslept.
So I have lots of cravings when I've short slept.
Yes, you have. And there's a reason why. Is firstly, 2 appetite hormones called leptin and ghrelin will go in opposite directions. So they sound like hobbits, I know, and I've got some Lord of the Rings thing here, but leptin is the signal that says to your brain, you're full,
Yeah.
you're satiated, don't eat anymore. Ghrelin is the opposite. It kind of makes your tummy growl, and it says you're hungry, you're not full, you need to eat more. When you are underslept, leptin, which says you're full, stop eating, that hormone is impaired, it drops away. So you lose the I'm full signal. And worse still, the ghrelin signal, which says I'm hungry, that increases. And so now you have about a 30 to 40% increased hunger drive. And the final part of this is that when you are underslept and taking on board calories, the way that you dispose of that energy is different. Your body has a higher predilection when you are sleep deprived to disposing of calories as fat rather than storing it, for example, as glycogen in the muscles.
Oh, so when I'm underslept, that's why, you're more likely to get belly fat.
Correct. And what's worse is that there was a great study where they looked at people who were dieting and either getting sufficient sleep or not getting sufficient sleep. What was fascinating is that both of those groups, whether you were well slept or not well slept, you both lost weight. In fact, you lost about the same amount of weight. So you'd think, okay, so that's fine. The problem was, if you looked at what you were losing, there was an issue. Those people who were dieting but not getting sufficient sleep, 70% of all of the weight that they lost came from lean muscle mass and not fat. In other words, when you're not getting sufficient sleep, you keep what you want to lose, which is fat, and you lose what you want to keep, which is muscle.
Oh, gosh. Damn, it's important, isn't it, the sleep stuff?
But coming back to ketosis, by the way, I would say when people go into a fasted state, usually what we see is that the sleep gets shorter. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, I sleep almost more efficiently. I'll sleep for maybe just 4 or 5 hours, but I feel more alert and more awake. Now, some of that has to do with the ketosis. When you are calorically deprived, the brain starts to realize that something is wrong because you are lacking calories. You're going into starvation. So it drives on a chemical called orexin. Orexin is a wake-promoting chemical, and it forces your brain to release much more of this wakefulness chemical called orexin. So now, when you're fasting, it's easier to stay awake for longer, and your brain will deliberately stop you from sleeping as much. It's not because it wants you to sleep less. It's because the only time during our evolutionary past that we experienced short sleep was when we were in a caloric deficit. And the reason comes back again to this idea that you have to stay awake longer because you're not finding food. Now, your brain doesn't know you've deliberately decided to fast, which is a good thing in lots of ways. But that's one of the reasons that when people are fasting, they'll say, my sleep goes to heck in a handbasket.
Mine goes really, really short. So when I'm in ketosis now and I'm like on my way in, and my sleep will reduce to about 5-6 hours, my Whoop scores plummet.
Yeah.
Until I kind of come out the other end, which might take a couple of weeks, and then my sleep scores seem to stabilize again. But that initial transition period, it looks like it's having a physiological shock.
It is. And the shock is this chemical orexin, which is this wake-promoting chemical, which will force you to stay awake in a very solid fashion. By the way, case in point, people with narcolepsy, this sleep disorder where they inadvertently and uncontrollably fall asleep during the day, they have the opposite. I was just telling you that when you are fasting, your brain dumps out this chemical orexin to force you awake, and you're wide awake. People with narcolepsy, when we've studied their brains, they have a deficiency of this brain chemical, orexin, so they can't stay awake in a stable fashion. They have the opposite of your fasting problem. You're wide awake because you've got too much orexin. They've got too little orexin. And therefore, they can't sustain stable wakefulness during the day, so they're constantly falling asleep. This story of orexin has led to the invention of the first new class of sleeping medication that I actually favor, and most people are not aware of it. It's a new class we're on to essentially Web 3.0 of sleep medication. Web 1.0 were the benzodiazepines, things like Xanax and Valium, not great for sleep. The second wave, the Web 2.0, those were things like Ambien, Lunesta, Sonata. Both of those drugs worked in a very similar way, where they go up to your cortex and they tickle a receptor called the GABA receptor, GABA, G-A-B-A, and it's the major neuroinhibitory transmitter of the brain. So when these drugs flood your brain, they just hit the red light and they stop neural firing of the cortex. Essentially, they sedate you. And sedation is not sleep. But when you take an Ambien, you mistake sedation for sleep. It's not quite the same. It's not naturalistic sleep. But after we realized, by way of the story of narcolepsy, that narcolepsy patients, they don't have this chemical orexin, and they're falling asleep inappropriately during the day. Well, think about what insomnia is at night. Insomnia is almost the opposite of narcolepsy, which is that narcolepsy patients, they're falling asleep during the day when they want to be awake. Insomnia patients are awake at night when they want to be asleep. So what they realized is that what we can do, if this chemical orexin, this wakefulness volume button in the brain, is a problem in insomnia patients, what if we were to just develop a drug that doesn't sedate the cortex like Ambien? Instead, it goes down into the brainstem where the center for orexin is. And these new drugs, and they're called the DORAs drugs, D-O-R-A, small s. And it's a class of drugs. There are 3 FDA approved. And I'll try and spell them out for you. They're called suvorexant, lomborexant, and daridorexant. Exactly. I mean, why my synapses are filled with things like those names, but there you go. They're 3 FDA-approved drugs. And what they do is they act like a clever set of chemical fingers. They go down into the brainstem where this sort of orexin is being released, and they just dial down the volume on wakefulness, and then they take a step back and they allow the antithesis of wakefulness to come in its place, which is this thing called naturalistic sleep. Now, if you look at that, those clinical data, they absolutely make you sleep for not necessarily a longer period of time, but you're awake a lot less. So you've got nice sleep efficiency, more continuity. But I, as a scientist, could be very skeptical, and I could come along and say, okay, so this new drug, it increases your total sleep time, improves your sleep efficiency, but I have 4 words, yes, and so what? Just because I've added sleep to your night, how do I know that that's functional sleep? How do I know that that's useful sleep? Couldn't it just be like junk DNA? It could be just junk sleep. Well, they did a study where they looked at what we call the glymphatic system in your brain. There's a cleansing system in your brain that kicks into high gear during deep non-REM sleep. And it flushes the brain of all of the metabolic toxins, 2 of which are things called beta amyloid and tau protein, which are the culprits of Alzheimer's. And that's why we know that sleep is so important, because at night, it's a good night's sleep clean. It's a power cleanse that washes away the Alzheimer's toxins. So they did a study. Heavens knows how they got these people to participate, but they brought them in. They were 50 years or older. And in the morning and the night before, they had a lumbar spinal puncture, and they siphoned off cerebrospinal fluid so they could measure how much of the metabolic detritus was in the brain before sleep and in the brain after sleep, including the metabolic waste product, sort of including beta amyloid and tau protein. And they either had one of these drugs, the DORAs drugs, or they had a placebo. And fair enough, when they took this new class of medication, the Web 3.0, the DORA drug, their sleep got better. But what they also found is that not only did their sleep get better, but they had cleansed the brain the next morning of more beta amyloid and tau protein than the placebo group. In other words, it wasn't just epiphenomenal junk sleep. It was beneficial sleep. It was adaptive, useful sleep, because that drug-induced sleep had washed away more of the Alzheimer's proteins. And it was the first demonstration, and they've now replicated it in animal models, that this is a sleeping pill that isn't disadvantageous, which we know to be the case for things like Ambien. In fact, Ambien, there was a recent study that showed that it decreases the cleansing, pulsing fluid by about 30 to 40% at night. But this is a new class of medications that does the opposite.
And this is new.
And this is new. The DORAs drugs, D-O-R-A small s. The problem is that a lot of insurance companies here in the United States currently do not reimburse. Some do. And I believe that it's some of these, of the 3 DORA's drugs, not all of them are available in Europe or in the UK.
That's probably about right.
And because they're just so expensive. And if you pay out of pocket, it can be up to $400 a month for these medications. Now, some insomnia patients, when I go to them and say at the end of a shockingly bad month of sleep, if I went to them and said, look, if you gave me $400 now, I could wave a magic wand and eradicate all of that bad sleep over the previous month. Would you like to give me $400? Most of them would say, absolutely, take my money. But still, people are being priced out at this stage. But the DORA's drugs, please look into them if you're struggling with insomnia, as well as CBTI.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.